Don't attach your value to how your kids are going to turn out, because they're going to walk through seasons just like we do, ups and downs and valleys. And the dangerous place is when we start drawing straight lines from a child's mistake to our identity in parenting. Like if they're doing bad, then all of a sudden we say, well, we're a bad mom, but rather have enough confidence in your identity in Christ.
Hi, welcome to the Women of Joy podcast. I'm your host, Megan Waldrop-Swindling, and I'm so glad that you're here. Today, I'm excited to sit down with my friend, Lysa TerKeurst. Lysa is known to all of us as someone she's just let us in. Like she's become a friend over the years to all of you and shared many words with us. She's a New York Times bestselling author and leader of Proverbs 31 Ministries. And today we get very real, not only about walking through an unwanted divorce, but how do we as friends that maybe didn't walk through an unwanted divorce, how do we help our friends that are walking through them? How do you support? And then how should believers respond, and really getting into scripture of what does God say about this topic. And so enjoy this conversation with my friend Lysa TerKeurst.
Hold your head up high. This is our time.
Well, hi Lysa, welcome to the Women of Joy show.
Thank you so much. I love Women of Joy, and so it's a real honor to be with you.
You've been coming for as long as I can remember.
Maybe since you've been alive. No,
at least since I moved back and we were a part of Women of Joy. Yeah. So like 15 years or more.
Probably so, yeah.
Yeah. I say we call you guys by your last names in our house, like Lysa Harper and Lysa TerKeurst. So we say TerKeurst and Harper. It's funny because there's a lot of Lysas in our life. But
there are a lot of Lysas.
So much fun. And you and I are joined. We're both adoptive mamas too, and so that's a lot of fun.
It is. It's I was just texting with someone today, and I said one of my greatest joys is that God has completely captured one of my adopted son's hearts, and now he's in ministry, and it is just a beautiful thing to watch.
That's really fun. Is he the one that just wrote a book?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, it's on my nightstand. I'm excited to read it, actually.
Yeah.
And let Zoe read it. So tell us about your family and more about them.
Yeah, so I have 5 kids. They're all grown. Jackson is my oldest. He's the one that wrote the book. And he is eking toward his 40s. He would die if I told that, but I just did, so oh well.
I think he and I are close in age.
Probably.
Yeah.
And then I have my son, Mark, who's probably 1 year younger. And when I say probably, it's because we adopted them from Africa. And so it was a guessing game, like how old are you and when were you born? So we'll probably never know. But according to the paperwork we got, then Mark's 1 year younger. And then my daughter, Hope, is my oldest daughter. And she is pregnant with her second baby. So that's very exciting. And then my daughter Ashley has 2 little boys. Hope has a little boy and now is having a little girl. So that's very exciting. Ashley has 2 little boys. And then Brooke has a little girl and she is pregnant with a little boy. So when it's all said and done, like by June, I will have 10 grandchildren.
That's so fun.
And then I have 2 stepchildren too. So that's exciting.
That's so fun. Yeah, you've brought them to Dollywood here before.
I sure have.
Women of Joy.
Yes, so I sure have. Yeah, they're fun. They would travel with me all the time if they didn't have to go to school. This would be their full-time gig because they love doing this.
That's great. And as your family has grown over the years and changed, you've walked through some hard seasons, very hard seasons. And you've chosen a path that a lot of people don't choose when they're in the public eye. And you've let us in very closely. And so many women I know have experienced so much healing from that. But tell me why you chose to do that.
Yeah, well, I kind of felt like I didn't really have a choice. I could either tell my story or it was going to be told by the rumor mill. And so, unfortunately, when you're in the public eye, people, if they don't know something, then they want to fill in the gaps, and I understand that. I mean, I understand it's a curious thing, especially when a Bible teacher suddenly announces that her marriage is ending. I wish with all of my heart that surviving an unwanted divorce was not part of my story, was not part of my ministry, but it is. And at the end of the day, I didn't want a divorce. At the end of the day, I had to accept a very painful reality and walk through the death of my marriage. And so I think when it first happened, I knew that if I didn't share what I was going through, then other people would, media outlets and all of that. And so I shared, and I thought that I would probably be like kicked out of ministry. But that's not what happened at all. As a matter of fact, the exact opposite happened. And my eyes were open to this world of so many women who unfortunately have had very similar experiences to me and were drowning because they didn't have access to the kind of connections that I had. And I was able to find an amazing therapist. I had a theologian on staff with me at Proverbs 31 Ministries, Dr. Joel Mutamali, and then Jim Kress was my professional counselor. And as those two men really met me where I was in my extreme brokenness and walked through just the deepest valleys with me and helped answer questions that I was terrified would go unanswered my whole life, I just kept thinking, I can't hold this to myself. Like, there's other women that will need this. So I made the decision to not share all of the details. There's a million details that people will never know. The situation was way worse than what I will ever share. But the details really just satisfy people's curiosity. And that's not what I'm doing here. That's not what I want to do. I want to quickly get to the transferable wisdom that helped me survive this and get through this. And so my heart is to help other women. And, you know, sometimes I step back and I think, Lord, like, I was already knee deep in ministry. You know, I loved the ministry work that I was doing. I never wanted to be the poster child for Christian divorce. But, you know, I think the Lord just over and over shows me that he truly does take what the enemy meant for evil and he will use it for good. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's always going to feel good to us when we have to walk through the heartbreak, but it is good. And now I can see thousands upon thousands upon thousands of women who have been helped in the darkest season of their life. And I'm thankful for that.
And you're offering hope, right? But it's so important, as you point out, to note to listeners, you're not sharing it all. People shouldn't share, because some women feel the need to share everything, but that's not healthy either.
Yeah, there's a big difference between privacy and secrecy. Secrecy is when we withhold information for the purpose of bad behavior continuing. And so a lot of women feel bad if they like are holding something secret in their mind. That's not a good thing. But holding something private is what we're actually doing. And holding something private is for the sake of healing, not hiding. And so I think we should hold details private. And the timing is really important as well. But it doesn't take a lot for women to kind of get it who need the help, you know. I mean, all I have to say is I've walked through and survived an unwanted divorce. I had my heart broken. The dream for my family was shattered. And then I was left to pick up the pieces on my own. See, there's no details there. Yeah. It's just the basic facts. And honestly, I don't have to say anything more than that in order for women who need the information or the encouragement or the Bible teaching around this topic. I don't really have to say anything more. I mean, the tears start flowing and they start nodding their head and they get it.
And so there's two groups of women listening to the podcast or watching. There's one group that have walked through an unwanted divorce. Maybe there are a third category of women that have walked through an intentional divorce, but that's not what we're talking about here. And then there are women who have friends that have walked through some type of divorce. And so if you're listening, you can take nuggets for your friend or for yourself. And so in that, though, we've been talking about shame this season as part of our theme for Women of Joy being radiant. What role has shame played? I know I hear from friends that have walked through divorce, just, I can't tell anyone this. Like, I can't go to church. I can't be in public. You had to have dealt with that in some capacity. I mean, you just mentioned it with your platform. What would you say to those women that feel like they're walking in shame?
You know, shame is really what the enemy does to keep us bound in his lies. And there's a big difference between like conviction, which if we've done something wrong, we should feel conviction. But oftentimes what I see women doing is they're carrying shame over choices that their husband or soon to be ex-husband made. And you know, that's really hard to watch, because if you were in a situation where your husband started making choices that did not line up with fidelity in marriage, and that can be financial fidelity, it could be, you know, that he had an affair, it could be emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, spiritual abuse. I mean, there's just a lot of dynamics that come into play. And so often I see women carrying shame because their marriage fell apart, but in reality, they weren't the one that pulled the lever that like started the unraveling. And look, every marriage has issues, but just because you've made some mistakes in your marriage doesn't give your partner permission to stop seeking your highest good. And in a marriage, that's really what it requires, both people seeking each other's highest good.
That's so good. And within that marriage, thinking about just how you've chosen what to share and what not to share, but even your kids, like, I just think you chose a path of getting more near to God, where we've seen so many people in the public forum that have chosen to fall away from God whenever bad things have happened to them.
Yeah.
What drew you in instead of pushing you away?
You know, that's such a good question. And I have to say there was never a season where I would have walked away from the Lord. There was never a season where, you know, I would have, you know, like taken apart my faith and, you know, then kind of dismantled some of the solid theology that I've stood on my whole life. There was never a season that I was tempted to do that. But there was a season where I felt kind of disillusioned by God. And I felt like I just needed to be quiet for a little while. And I did pull back from ministry, I think wisely so. My heart was so shattered. And I think one of the main questions I kept asking is, how could a good God see what was happening and let it happen, or not warn me? You know, I was so completely caught off guard. And I know sometimes people are like, come on, Lysa, you had to have some kind of indication. Yes, I had an indication that, you know, that there was something off with my then husband, but there were so many things that I could attribute it to. You know, we were having our kids all in transition seasons, and 3 of our 5 kids were getting married in 2016. And so there was a lot of change. There was a lot of different dynamics happening. And so a lot of what I was experiencing, I just kind of attributed to those changes and to middle life stuff. And, you know, but in my mind, no, I was as shocked as you can imagine. And I made the discovery of my then husband's infidelity the night before my daughter's rehearsal dinner I was hosting it at my house. And so the conundrum of so much stuff happening, I do remember feeling like, Lord, the timing of this seems really cruel. I had just released a book on rejection, and now I'm going to have to walk through the most painful rejection of my life. and talk about this subject over and over and do interviews for this and then sit beside, the man that I just found out is being unfaithful, and sit beside him and go through all these weddings, and how am I going to shepherd my kids in the most vulnerable season of their adult life. And the pressure was just absolutely enormous. And so, there was a season where I had big questions for God, and I had a lot of hurt and heartbreak. But the beautiful thing is the Lord, he can take all of that. We see David in the Bible pouring out his heart, pouring out his brokenness, pouring out his disillusionment, his angst, his anguish, all of that. And, one of the most comforting places to me in the Bible is in Mark chapter 14, starting in verse 32, right before Jesus is about to be crucified, and he has the Last Supper. He crosses the Kidron Valley, goes into the Garden of Gethsemane. And Jesus, who is fully man but also fully God, sinless but very much sinned against, knows the weight of being a human, feels the gravity of heartbreak and disillusionment from people betraying him, people that were close to him. And when he goes into the Garden of Gethsemane and he starts to pray, he prays two really profound prayers. One thing that he cries out to the Lord is like, God, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. And as I read that, I thought to myself, wait a minute, this is Jesus. And Jesus, because he's fully God, he knows the answer to every question. And yet he still is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. And I thought for so long, and part of my disillusionment with God is, why did this happen? I felt like if I had the answer, why did this happen? What good could ever come from it? How is it ever going to get better? How is it going to turn out? I felt like, God, if you'll just give me those answers, then it would ease the ache of my sorrow. But Jesus had every answer, and he was still overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. And so it taught me something profound. It's like having answers is not what will ease the ache of our sorrow. And we can spend our whole life chasing answers, and that leads us straight away from God.
How did God, I know in the hardest seasons of my life, there's still been just moments of God's kindness. Are there any moments that you reflect back on with the weddings and just the chaos of that season, but where you just say, God, you were so kind to me?
Yeah, I would probably say in 2016, one of the kindest things that God did for me is after I got through the first two weddings, we were going to week-long intensives to see if the marriage could be saved. And after one of those intensives, the day after we got home, I went to step out of bed and collapsed, and I was just in intense pain. And they rushed me to the hospital. I was in the hospital for a week. They were running tests. They couldn't figure out what was wrong. My abdomen distended to where it looked like I was about 9 months pregnant. And it all happened in a matter of a week. And the doctors couldn't figure out what was happening. And then on Friday, there was this doctor that came to do a rotation at the hospital to fill in. And he was from a completely different hospital. And he happened to see me, and he knew of another test that needed to be run. And when they ran that test, he came into my room, and he said, I have to rush you into emergency surgery right now. And I saw God's kindness in providing a way for me to get the help I needed. And according to that doctor, there was not a second to spare. I mean, I was that close to not making it. And then even in the surgery, what was happening inside of my body is that my colon had ripped away from the abdominal wall, twisted around itself, and cut off the blood flow inside of me. And what this doctor explained to me after surgery is that my brain had already signaled to my gut that I had passed away, and the process of autolysis was starting to happen, which is where your body decomposes. And the doctor said, I don't like to use the word miracle, but it is truly a miracle that you survived this. And I could see the kindness of God in that, you know? And there were just so many things where I felt like, you know, God showed up right on time. And it was hard for me to understand going through the heartbreak, and then on top of the heartbreak, going through the medical issues and still having weddings to plan and all of that. And then a year later, I got diagnosed with breast cancer. But
I forgot about that. You did.
yeah, but,
Wow.
you know, I could see that the Lord, it's almost like this, it was so much chaos happening, so many hard things. It was almost like the Lord said, I'm going to give you right now grace for what you're facing. I'm going to give you surgery grace because you're going through surgery. I'm going to give you divorce grace because you're walking through a divorce. I'm going to give you breast cancer grace. You've never needed it before, but I'm going to give it to you because you need it now. The interesting thing about the breast cancer diagnosis is that summer, it was in the summer of 2017, a year after my previous surgery, I thought things were getting better in my marriage, and then everything fell apart again. And so in the summer of 2017, that's when I really pulled back from a lot. And because I pulled back from ministry and just needed a season of rest and healing, I decided to make all the appointments that when I'm traveling, you know, sometimes it's hard to make. And it was not time for me to have a mammogram, but I went because I had time to go. And I think I even may have had to pay for it because, you know, they only give you so much, you know, so many appointments on your insurance. But anyways, I went, and that's when they discovered breast cancer. And so I'll point out the grace of God in this. Like, I was devastated that my marriage fell apart, but if my marriage wouldn't have fallen apart, I wouldn't have gone to that appointment. If I wouldn't have gone to that appointment, I would not have gotten the diagnosis as early as I got it. And I was able to have a double mastectomy and, you know, get the treatment that I needed, and my life was spared. So, you know, could I look at that whole situation, could I look at it with bitterness in my heart, like hard thing upon hard thing? God, how could you let so much happen to me? Or I could say, okay, God, I don't understand it and I don't like it, but I see your hand of faithfulness because through it you saved my life.
Goodness. That's a hard season. It's a very hard season.
Yes. Yes. And that kind of brings me to the second thing that Jesus prayed when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane. He said, the second prayer was, God, everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me. And when I read those words of Jesus, I thought, wow, even Jesus asked God to change the plan. And the humanity that he expressed in that moment was so deeply touching to me, because Jesus had all the answers and he still ached with sorrow. Jesus knew how this was going to turn out, and he still asked God to change the plan. But then he utters those 9 earth-shaking, hell-shattering, demon-quaking words, yet not what I will, but what you will, Lord. And the comfort for me in reading that is I could look at every word that Jesus spoke and taught then through the lens of Jesus really gets it. He really gets it. He knows the deepest sorrow. He knows when the plans are so scary or so overwhelming that you want God to change them. And so because he knows that, everything he spoke and everything he taught, it was for us. He was not just preaching at us. He was teaching it for us so that, like he said, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. And so those verses were very profound in my life.
Yes. And for all of us in any hard season that we're walking through, he knows all of it, because that was the hardest thing that any human has ever walked through. And he did it with such grace. What in all of that did you find? You've studied this topic so much now on this side of things. What does God tell us about divorce?
Well, here's an interesting thing that I think if you read my book, Surviving an Unwanted Divorce, Dr. Joel Muddamalle and Jim Kress, we wrote it all together. We're the 3 voices of the podcast, Therapy and Theology. And we've done an entire season on this. But when we wrote the book, I listed out what I felt like were all the verses that had been weaponized against women by other Christians. And look, some of them were very well-meaning, you know, it is godly to want to save marriages. But where it starts to get really complicated and unfair is when you go after the wrong person in that marriage. And if a woman has been so traumatized that she's finally at the place where she's had to accept, I'm going to have to walk through this unwanted divorce, we shouldn't go after her. Like, we should really call to account the one who has caused the devastation in that marriage. And look, I know it can go both ways. I'm sure that there are men listening, and they're the ones who have been hurt and heartbroken. And so this goes both ways. But one of the most painful verses is Malachi 2:16. And that a lot of people quote it, and it may be their only verse they know about divorce. God hates divorce, right? Which, to a woman who, like me, who never wanted a divorce, I set my life around keeping my vows until my dying breath, you know? And when I would hear somebody say, well, you know, God hates divorce, it made me feel like, well, you know, God hates you because you're making this decision, you know? And so I decided that Joel and I needed to sit down and do the entire biblical theology of divorce, go through all the verses, make the connections for people, research it. So here's what's interesting. The King James Version, which came about in the 1600s, that's not the first Bible. The first Bible was all the way back, you know, the Hebrew, of course, but then when the Hebrew was translated into Greek, that's called the Septuagint. And so if we go all the way back to the Septuagint and we look at those verses, they're very complicated verses because you've got to unpack linguistically the direction of the hatred. But what I believe and what Joel believes and what a lot of theologians believe now is a much better interpretation of that verse is not God hates divorce, but rather when a man hates and divorces his wife, he does violence against the one he should protect, thus says the Lord. So that's a big difference.
That's a big difference.
Exactly. And here's what's interesting. If you have NIV, ESV, CSB, and you look up Malachi 2:16, that's what it now says.
Wow.
It doesn't even say, it may have a footnote, God hates divorce, you know, referencing the King James Version. But a lot of Christians hear the word divorce and then they just say that statement and they probably not opened up their Bible to even look at what Malachi 2:16 actually says.
And such a good moment, though, to flag, like, context matters.
It does.
We know this. Hopefully our listeners know this, but just a reminder, context matters. And we shouldn't use scripture to weaponize our fellow believers in any instance.
That's right.
Because we all do things that God hates.
Right.
We're sinners.
And here's the interesting thing. God came up with this concept of divorce to protect the women who otherwise would have been abused and marginalized. And, you know, I mean, in a patriarchal society, a woman didn't have a lot of rights. And here's what's interesting. The Israelites were surrounded by other ites, the Amalekites, the Moabites, all the ites, right? None of them had a provision to protect women like the Israelites did. So God allowed this to be instituted so that it could protect the woman that was being harmed in a patriarchal society. And so here's what would usually happen. If a man was, and there's several things, but if he was abandoning her financially, or if he was having an affair, or if he was, I mean, there was a whole list of things that he could have been doing that caused the woman harm, or if he just cast her out. The rabbis would go to him and try to repair the marriage. But if he was not cooperating, then the rabbis would demand that he give the wife a certificate of divorce, because without that certificate of divorce, if she tried to go back to her family, it would bring so much shame on the family that they would, to keep shame off the family, they would kick her out. And then she would be completely alone. But with that certificate of divorce, the shame was released, and she could, enter right back into her family life and all of that. And the dowry had to be returned to her. So the dowry was financial provision that had been set aside, and the woman was given the dowry so that she wouldn't have to be so poor that she would turn to prostitution or some other means to just survive. And so, I think it's really important, like you said, that when we read verses, that we keep in mind the full context of the biblical theology of this. Now, I don't want you to hear God promotes divorce. I don't want you to hear me say that. But God allowed it to protect the women who were being very, very hurt and harmed and who needed protection. And so how good of God to make sure that they had a way to be protected.
And recognizing the fallen world that we live in. I mean, I know you considered that just in the book and different conversations that you've had around this topic, like how divorce is a result of sin, and sin being the reason, just on this side of the fall, like we're not going to experience true healing from that this side of heaven.
Yeah. And wherever there is sin, there's chaos. And so, I think another provision that God gives us is He exemplified for us boundaries. And, show me where there's chaos in your life, and I'll show you where there's a needed boundary. Isn't it interesting that the very first recorded conversation between God and man in Genesis, the very first recorded conversation of all the topics that God could have chosen to be the subject matter of that first recorded conversation, God chose the subject of a boundary. And He does it in the context of freedom. He says to Adam, you are free. So see, He's setting up, this is for the sake of freedom. You are free to eat from any tree in the garden. Plenty of provision all around Adam. But, and here comes the boundary, you must not, very clear, He's speaking with great clarity, eat from the tree that is in the center of the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And now here comes a consequence, because a boundary without a consequence is nothing but a bad suggestion. Or a suggestion that won't be listened to, right? So here comes the consequence, or you will die. And so right from the very beginning, for the sake of freedom, for the sake of relational health, for the sake of protection, God established boundaries. And so boundaries are not just a good idea, they're actually God's idea. But again, sometimes I think we get that confused, because we think, well, aren't we supposed to love everyone? Yes, we are. Didn't Jesus lay down His life? Yes. Did Jesus model for us to lay down our life for? Yes. So you see how much confusion can happen when, we're having this conversation about boundaries. But I want us to remember something. Jesus laid down His life to accomplish a high and holy purpose. Jesus did not lay down His life to enable bad behavior to continue.
Oh, that's good. I have to ask this, because you've heard from thousands of women as you've written on this topic. We hear from thousands of women throughout the year. And one of the things that we were just on the Women of Joy cruise in January, and I talked about just seasons of barrenness, like when I was speaking. And part of that, I mentioned the empty nest season and just choices that women can make in seasons where our bodies are changing and things are happening to us that may feel out of our control, right? But for women who are in that season of empty nesting, their kids are getting married, it's chaos, and they're considering choices that are not of God, or they just don't know who they are. How do you encourage women in that season of life?
Yeah, I think, you're at such a pivotal point to, it's almost like, here we go. We're entering into, a major new phase of life. And we want the foundational decisions that we make to point our life in the right direction. And so every decision matters, and that's true of our entire life. Right. But show me a decision that you're making, and I'll show you the direction you're pointing your life in. And if you point your life in the direction of chaos, then chaos is what you will reap from those choices. But if you point your life in the direction of solid friendships that have a foundation of, biblical wisdom, and you point your life in the direction of chasing purpose rather than, sinful pleasure. If you point yourself in the direction of legacy, there's no more important parenting time, I'm convinced, than as your children are growing up, and then now you're parenting adult children. And if you point your life in a direction that's away from the Lord, it will have a tremendous impact on the legacy that you leave.
That's a good way to say that. I know someone described sexual sin to me as like the person who's doing the sin as a spider web, and like everything they touch, it sticks to. And I just, within that season, that's such a good word, because it touches those are such impactful seasons of your children's lives.
And I know it's really hard.
It's hard.
It's hard. Like, I'm not going to sit here and go, menopause is just, boy, is it a walk in the park. It's like Disney World for women, because it's not. It's hard. And I know what it feels like to get to a certain age and wake up one morning and go, is this it? Like, this is it. Like, this is life, I know what it feels like to have some of your kids make decisions and you think, I sacrificed my whole life, my whole world for you, and this is the thanks that I get, So I'm not minimizing any of that hurt and pain, and I'm not criticizing for people struggling through that. I understand it. I really do.
But there's not like a newfound freedom, right, within that season of life. And maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but I haven't felt so oppressed. I haven't felt like I couldn't have the freedom. Now, am I busy? Yes, I have a 12, 13, and 14-year-old, But within that, like, you can still be all that God wants you to be and have purpose. You shouldn't have to wait until your kids aren't there to have purpose. And so many moms right now aren't. Like, their kids are their whole life, and that's not healthy either, because if you're not healthy getting to the stage of being an empty nester, then you're not going to wake up the next day and be healthy.
And enjoy the mess out of your kids. Spend as much time with them as you want. But it's not about, like, if your kids are your whole world, then amazing, great. But the thing is, don't attach your value to how your kids are going to turn out, because they're going to walk through seasons just like we do, ups and downs and valleys. And the dangerous place is when we start drawing straight lines from a child's mistake to our identity in parenting. And like, if they're doing bad, then all of a sudden we say, well, we're a bad mom, but rather have enough confidence in your identity in Christ, have enough passion to keep the Lord the main focus that you need, to make sure that if your child makes a mistake, I want you to draw a straight line from that child's mistake to a strength that God made sure you have, so that you can be the parent and the coach and the mentor and the guide to that child, even in the midst of those mistakes that they're making. One of my main principles as being a mom was keep them talking. And that was not easy, because, sometimes, like, you keep them talking and you're going to hear some things that it's like, wow. And you need to provide the safety to say, like I would say to my kids, if you tell me what happened then you're not going to get in nearly as much trouble as if I discover it. And I will discover it because, I have this deep down discernment knowing. I think it's God's gift to us as women.
It is.
But so my principle was like, keep them talking. And I had to tell my face, don't
Don't have
show
reaction.
the
Yes.
fear that is in your heart right now, or don't show the chaos you're feeling internally, all that anxiety. Don't let your face, keep your face just engaged with them. But the reason I wanted to keep them talking was because as long as there's communication, you always have an influence in your child's life. And something my therapist taught me that was very, very helpful. He said, why don't you say, are you open to a thought? Especially as your kids get to be older and making their own decisions and becoming adults and all of that. It becomes more and more important to say, are you open to a thought? And when I do that, if my adult kids are not open to a thought, then I respect that.
Yeah.
But very rarely do they ever say no. And I'm grateful for that.
That's really good. In closing, thinking back to your friends, and you don't have to speak to your friends in particular, but people that are walking alongside someone that's experiencing an unwanted divorce, what have you seen that people should not do, and maybe a couple of things that they should do?
Well, there's so many complications when you're walking through this and so many different scenarios. But I can tell you something that a wise boundary that my kids drew that was very important, and it played out to be extremely important. But one boundary that they said to me, they said, Mom, if you could not bring Dad up, like if we want to talk about him, let us bring him up. But when you bring him up, it just is hard. And if we're not talking about it, that probably means we're not really in the mood to talk about it. And I thought that was very
That's so wise.
profound.
Yeah.
And I honored that boundary because I felt like it was really important. And also, unfortunately, my kids were well aware of what happened because they made their own discoveries. But they're never going to know the full weight of hurt that you've suffered. Some kids are going to be in situations where maybe the mom is even getting blamed because the ex-husband is spinning a story about things, and that is hard and that is brutal. And I just want to acknowledge that. But I would encourage that woman, and I did this as well. Have some friends who love you enough to be able to pour your heart out to them and say, this is how I'm hurting, this is how I'm hurting, this is how I'm hurting, because this is what's been done, this is what's been said, this is how this is impacting me. And one of the best things, if you're that friend, one of the best things that you can do is to look at your friend who's just poured out her heart and say, I believe you, and it was wrong. What's been said to you was wrong. What happened was wrong. That should have never, ever, ever been done to you. Because you see, there's something really healing when another human dares to bear witness to your pain. Because part of what can feel so incredibly unfair is that nobody will ever know what really happened. But if you have a few trusted friends that you can confide in and you can tell the full story and you can find healing and understanding and support there, then that will reduce the risk that you look at your kids and have them try to fill that role.
That's so good. And within that, so the opposite would be your friends not starting more drama.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And asking questions that aren't, you said you choosing to share the story, not calling you saying, what happened today? What did he do today? Allowing people to come to you instead of being nosy, really.
Yeah. And, I understand it's almost like when you're driving down the highway and there's a car accident. It's only natural to look over to try to figure out what happened, right? And so when someone goes through a divorce, it's only natural for a friend to look over and try to figure out what happened. And there's two reasons they're doing it. One, maybe because they care about you. I hope that that's why they're doing it. Maybe they want to start drama. I hope that that is not the case. But maybe they're trying to figure out what went wrong because they don't want that to happen in their marriage. And so all of those dynamics are happening in the side of a person. But one of the most painful things that people would say to me, and I would just highly encourage you to never ever say this to someone, especially a woman who's suffering through an unwanted divorce. Well, you know, there's two sides to every story. And look, I get it. I understand. There's two different narratives to this story. But why are we picking sides? This is not a spectator sport. There is a family that is being destroyed on the field. Just jump in and help where help is needed.
That's so good. And you have to seek help. I know we've walked through this with a friend, and she didn't seek help. She stayed in the bed, right? And I remember going over and saying, okay, we're getting up today. Like, we're opening the blinds. We're going to go get some chocolate, and not asking until she was ready to talk. But you chose to get out of bed probably for your kids more than anything in that season.
Yeah, but I also had some of those friends that, just like you, come over, open up the windows, like, come on,
we're doing
getting
this
out of bed,
thing.
we're doing this.
Yeah.
Your life is not over. You know, this is not an ending point. This is a transition point. And so I'm thankful for those friends because, look, the pain is indescribable. It just is. And it is really hard to walk toward a future that you don't want. And for so long in life, you know, we dream about the future, but grief is like dreaming in reverse. We stop looking forward to the future and we just start looking back at the past.
Thank you so much on behalf of tens of thousands of women across the country and the world, really, for just being open and sharing. I know that's hard. Like, there's so much commentary that I'm sure you've had to live through that you did not want to live through in sharing on this topic. But it's so needed because it is a part of the world that we live in, this fallen world. So thank you for that.
You're so welcome.
This is the final question that we ask every guest. What is something that is bringing you unexpected joy in this season of your life?
Okay, this is probably going to surprise you.
Okay.
But I love the fact that we serve a creative God who brings beauty in so many aspects of our life. And so I think it's really a neat thing to be like our Creator in that way and to pursue creatively bringing beauty into this world. So I have really gotten into thrifting and antiquing, and I love to find treasures that other people either thought that it needed to be tossed or whatever, or that something happened, maybe someone passed away and their estate got sold or whatever. But I love taking those things and putting it in a space in my home where it's like it comes back to life. You know, it's not sitting on the shelf collecting dust at the thrift store, but it's found a home. And now if you style it right, it'll bring beauty to your home. And so that really is bringing me a lot of joy.
I thought you were going to say that you were painting or something.
No, I do paint too.
You do? Okay.
I do. But right now, this is my thing, and
That's
I love
fun.
it.
And traveling, you can go to a lot of different places.
And I do. I do. I have extra room in my suitcase and some bubble wrap at all
great.
time.
Prepared. Well, thank you for being on the show. It's been a really great conversation, and I think it'll help and bring freedom to a lot of women. So
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Lysa TerKeurst as much as I did. If you enjoyed this podcast, we hope that you will subscribe and follow along, and we hope to see you soon at a live Women of Joy event.